They called it the cruelest prank Boston high society had ever seen. Clara Halloway wasn't just ignored. She was the family shame, hidden away because of a scar that marred her cheek and a stutter that silenced her voice. Her cruel sisters thought it would be hilarious to answer a mail-order bride ad for a notorious, reclusive rancher in Wyoming, using Clara's name, sending the ugly duckling to a man rumors said was a monster. They expected her to be rejected, humiliated, and sent back in tears. But they forgot one thing. Beauty isn't what survives in the Wild West. Grit is. And Clara Halloway was about to prove that the ugly daughter was the only one worth a damn. Boston, Massachusetts, April 1876. The drawing room of the Halloway estate smelled of lavender water and malicious intent. Outside, the rain lashed against the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. But inside, the atmosphere was stiflingly warm. Clara Halloway sat in the corner, her needlepoint hoop resting on her knees, her head bowed low. She wore her hair in a severe bun, pulled tight to the right side to obscure the port wine birthmark that stained her left cheek from temple to jawline. It was the mark that had defined her existence since birth. To her father, the ambitious merchant Cornelius Halloway, it was a bad investment. To her stepmother, Beatrice, it was a social liability. To her half-sisters, Lydia and Annabel, it was a source of endless amusement. "Stop squirming, Clara!" Lydia snapped, rustling the parchment in her hands. She was blonde, petite, and possessed the kind of beauty that concealed a rotting soul. "We are discussing your future." Clara didn't look up. "I thought my future was here. Keeping the books for Father." "Father has new accountants," Annabel chimed in, leaning over the velvet settee. "And frankly, having a 24-year-old spinster lurking in the library is hurting our prospects. Mr. Sterling needs a wife. And you, dear sister, need a home that isn't ours." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew about the letters. For weeks, she had watched Lydia and Annabel huddled over the writing desk, giggling and whispering. She had assumed they were writing to their own suitors. She hadn't realized they were forging her signature. "Mr. Sterling?" Clara whispered. "Elias Sterling," Lydia said, savoring the name like a piece of candy she intended to spit out. "A rancher. In Wyoming territory. We found his advertisement in a matrimony paper. Wanted. A woman of strong constitution and silence. Beauty unnecessary. Hard work required. It sounds perfect for you, doesn't it?" Annabel laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound. "We sent him your picture, Clara." "Well, we sent him a picture. We might have accidentally sent him the portrait of Cousin Margaret from before she lost her teeth. But we described you. We told him you were sturdy, obedient, and desperate." Clara stood up, the needlepoint sliding to the floor. "I won't go. You can't make me. The ticket is already bought." Beatrice's voice cut through the room as she entered, the rustle of her silk skirts sounding like a judge's gavel. She held a train ticket in one hand and a small, battered leather valise in the other. It wasn't one of the Halloway trunks. It was a servant's bag, Father agreed. Beatrice said coldly, not meeting Clara's eyes. "He believes the fresh air will be good for your condition. The train leaves tomorrow at dawn. You are going to Laramie, Clara, and you will not come back until you are Mrs. Elias Sterling." Clara looked at the three women, her family. There was no love in their eyes, only the gleam of a problem being solved. They weren't just sending her away. They were setting her up for a humiliation so profound it would break her. They were sending the ugly daughter to a rough man in a rough land, likely under false pretenses, expecting her to be rejected and cast out into the wilderness. "Why?" Clara asked, her stutter vanishing in the heat of her despair. "Why do you hate me so much?" Lydia smiled, stepping close enough that Clara could smell her expensive perfume. "We don't hate you, Clara. We just don't want to look at you anymore." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She packed the meager belongings she was allowed. 3 plain gray dresses, her mother's Bible, a small dagger she had stolen from her brother's collection years ago for protection, and her ledger books. She was good with numbers, better than any man she had ever met. It was the one secret pride she held. As the carriage rattled away from the Halloway estate the next morning, cutting through the gray Boston fog, Clara didn't look back. She touched the scar on her cheek. They thought this was the end of her life. They thought they were sending a joke to Wyoming, but jokes had a funny way of losing their punchline when the laughter stopped. Laramie, Wyoming Territory, May 1876. The journey took 6 grueling days. Clara Halloway stepped onto the wooden platform of the Laramie train station, her legs shaking from the phantom motion of the rail cars. The air here was different, thin, sharp, and smelling of sagebrush and coal smoke. It was a world away from the damp cobblestones of Boston. The station was bustling. Cowboys with spurs that jingled like warning bells, miners covered in dust, and women in calico dresses moved with a purpose Clara had never seen in the idle parlors of the East. She clutched her battered valise to her chest, trying to make herself small. She felt exposed. In Boston, she could hide in the shadows of the library. Here, under the vast, blindingly blue sky, there was nowhere to hide. She scanned the crowd, her heart rate spiking. She didn't know what Elias Sterling looked like. Her sisters hadn't bothered to show her his picture, if they even had one. They had only told her he was wealthy enough to take a charity case. "You looking for someone, miss?" Clara jumped. A station master with a handlebar mustache was eyeing her. "Mr. Sterling," she stammered, instantly cursing her tongue. "Elias S. Sterling." The station master's eyebrows shot up. The noise nearby seemed to dip slightly. A few heads turned. "Sterling?" the man repeated, his tone shifting from helpful to wary. "You're waiting for Elias Sterling?" "Yes, I am his bride." A cowboy leaning against a post nearby let out a sharp, incredulous guffaw. "Sterling sent for a bride? The Wolf of Red Rock sent for a woman?" Clara felt the heat rise in her face, burning the scar on her cheek. The wolf. That didn't sound like a man looking for a wife. It sounded like a man looking for prey. "He ain't here, miss," the station master said, pity entering his eyes. "Elias Sterling don't come into town much, and he definitely don't come for the noon train. If he's expecting you, he's late." Clara moved to the edge of the platform, sitting on her valise. She would wait. She had no money to return to Boston, and even if she did, the doors were locked. She was a parcel marked undeliverable. Hours passed. The sun began to dip toward the jagged horizon of the snowy range, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. The station emptied out. The wind picked up, biting through her thin gray wool dress. Just as Clara was resigning herself to sleeping on the bench, she heard the rhythmic thud of hooves. Not a carriage, but a wagon. Heavy. Fast. A buckboard wagon pulled by 2 massive black draft horses tore around the corner of the station house and skidded to a halt. The driver didn't climb down. He jumped. He was a giant of a man. That was Clara's first thought. He wore a black duster coat coated in gray dust, a low-brimmed Stetson pulled tight, and boots that looked like they had walked through hell and back. He moved with a predatory grace, stalking toward the platform. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up at her. His face was shadowed, but she saw the glint of eyes the color of cold steel. He had a heavy jaw covered in a few days' worth of dark stubble. He was handsome, in a terrifying, mountain-carved sort of way. "You the package?" His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Clara stood up, her knees knocking. "I am Clara Halloway." The man stepped up onto the platform, towering over her. He didn't offer a hand. He walked a circle around her, his eyes scanning her from her sensible boots to the severe bun of her hair. He paused when he saw the left side of her face. Clara instinctively turned away, raising a hand to cover the birthmark. "Don't," he commanded. It wasn't shouted, but it froze her in place. He reached out, his hand encased in a rough leather glove, and gently pulled her hand away from her face. He stared at the mark for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "They didn't mention the mark," he said flatly. "I know," Clara whispered, fighting back tears. "They said beauty was unnecessary." He let go of her hand and let out a sharp breath through his nose. He reached into his duster pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the letter her sisters had forged. "This letter says you're 20. Says you're fair of face and soft of spirit. Says your name is Annabelle." Clara gasped. "Annabelle? That's my sister. I am Clara, and I am 24. Elias Sterling looked at the letter, then at Clara. He crushed the paper in his fist. "Lying snakes," he muttered. "I didn't order a bride, Miss Halloway. I placed an ad for a housekeeper, a live-in housekeeper to manage the ranch books and the staff. My foreman's wife died last winter, and the place is falling to chaos." Clara felt the world spin. "A housekeeper?" "Yes. Some fool at the paper must have put it in the matrimony column by mistake. Or your family can't read." He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "You traveled 2,000 miles because you thought you were getting married?" "I traveled 2,000 miles because I had nowhere else to go," Clara said, a sudden spark of anger cutting through her fear. She straightened her spine. "And I am excellent with books. I managed my father's ledgers for 5 years. I can cook, I can clean, and I don't need to be soft of spirit to work." Elias stared at her. For the first time, a flicker of surprise crossed his stoic face. He looked at the trembling woman with the ugly scar who was standing up to him, the wolf of Red Rock on a freezing train platform. He looked at her hands. They were shaking, but they were gripping her dress with white-knuckled force. "You stutter," he observed. "Only when I'm terrified," she shot back. Elias snorted, a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. He grabbed her valise with one hand, tossing it into the back of the wagon, as if it weighed nothing. "It's a 4-hour ride to the ranch. It'll be dark in 20 minutes. If you want the job, get in. If not, catch the morning train back east." "I have no money for a ticket," Clara stated flatly. "Then I guess you're the new housekeeper," Elias said, climbing onto the buckboard seat. "Try not to fall out. The road is rough." Clara looked at the empty station, then at the broad back of the stranger. Her sisters had sent her to be a wife to a monster. Instead, she was a servant to a stranger. It was an improvement. She climbed onto the wagon seat next to him. Elias clicked his tongue, and the horses surged forward, carrying Clara Halloway into the dark, vast unknown of the Wyoming night. The trail to Red Rock midnight. The buckboard wagon bounced violently over a hidden rut, jarring Clara's teeth and sending a fresh wave of ache through her spine. She had been clinging to the wooden seat for 4 hours, her knuckles white, her body rigid. Beside her, Elias Sterling was a monolith of silence. He hadn't spoken since they left the outskirts of Laramie. The Wyoming night was not like the nights in Boston. In the city, there was always a glow. Gas lamps, windows, the distant hum of humanity. Here, the darkness was absolute, a heavy velvet blanket that seemed to swallow the light of the moon. The only sounds were the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of the draft horses and the wind whistling through unseen canyons. "Are you cold?" The question startled her. Elias didn't look at her. His eyes were trained on the darkness ahead, guiding the horses with an intuition she couldn't comprehend. "I am fine," Clara lied, her teeth chattering audibly. Elias sighed, a sound of annoyance. He shifted the reins to one hand and began to unbutton his heavy black duster. "Don't," Clara protested weakly. "I don't need. Quiet," he ordered. He shrugged off the heavy coat, the leather creaking, and tossed it over her shoulders. It was immense, swallowing her small frame. It smelled of tobacco, horse sweat, and sage, a masculine, earthy scent that was strangely comforting. The warmth of his body still clung to the lining, instantly cutting through the chill. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the collar up to her chin to hide her scar, though he couldn't see it in the dark. "Don't get used to it," he grunted. "A sick housekeeper is no use to me. I need someone to work, not nurse a fever." Clara looked at his profile. He was harsh, yes, but he had given her his coat. In Boston, men held doors open for her sisters and let them slam in Clara's face. This man spoke roughly but offered warmth. It was a confusing dichotomy. They crested a ridge, and suddenly, lights appeared in the valley below. Red Rock, Elias announced. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a fortress. The main house was a sprawling two-story structure made of timber and rough-hewn stone, built to withstand the elements. Smoke curled from 3 different chimneys. Surrounding it were barns, bunkhouses, and corrals that stretched out into the shadows. It looked prosperous, powerful, lonely. As they pulled into the yard, dogs began to bark, large, wolf-like hounds that surged toward the wagon until Elias let out a sharp, piercing whistle. They instantly fell silent, tails wagging low. "Stay close," Elias said, climbing down. "They don't know you yet." Clara scrambled down, tripping on the hem of the duster. Elias caught her by the elbow, steadying her. His grip was firm, his fingers callous. He held her a second longer than necessary before releasing her. Inside, the front door groaned open to reveal a cavernous entry hall. It was grand but neglected. A layer of dust coated the heavy oak tables. A beautiful rug was kicked up at the corner. The air smelled of stale smoke and unwashed wool. A short, stout woman with gray hair escaping a mob cap came bustling down the hallway, wiping her hands on a stained apron. "Mr. Sterling, you're back. Did you bring the supplies?" "We're out of flour, and the boys are threatening to eat the leather off their saddles." "I brought the flour, Martha," Elias said, hanging his hat on a rack made of deer antlers. "And I brought help." Martha stopped, squinting at Clara, who stood shivering in the oversized coat. "Help? You mean the housekeeper?" "This is Clara Halloway," Elias said. "She says she can cook and count." Martha let out a huff, walking around Clara, eyeing her like a horse at auction. "She's a slip of a thing. A stiff wind will blow her back to the East Coast." "And what's that on her face?" Clara instinctively turned her head, hiding the birthmark against the collar of the duster. "That's none of your concern, Martha," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave. It was a warning. "Show her to the guest room in the east wing. Not the servants' quarters. The roof is leaking in there." Martha's eyes widened. "The guest room? For the help?" "She's educated," Elias said, struggling for a reason. "She'll be handling the ledgers. Put her in the blue room." "Yes, sir," Martha grumbled. "Come along then, girl. Don't expect me to carry your bag." Clara looked back at Elias. He was already walking toward a set of double doors that looked like a study, his back to her. "Mr. Sterling?" she called out. He stopped, hand on the doorknob. "I will earn my keep," she said, her stutter absent. "I promise you." He glanced back over his shoulder. In the light of the oil lamps, he looked tired. "The books are a mess, Miss Halloway. If you can make sense of them, you'll be the first person in 5 years who can. Good night." He disappeared into the study, and the lock clicked. Clara followed Martha up the creaking stairs. The blue room was dusty, and the furniture was covered in sheets. But it was larger than her room in Boston. It had a 4-poster bed and a window that looked out over the mountains. Left alone, Clara took off the duster. She folded it neatly and placed it on the chair. She walked to the mirror, holding a candle up to her face. The purple mark was angry in the flickering light. "Ugly," she whispered to her reflection, the word her sister Lydia had drilled into her. But then she looked at the bed. A bed in a house where the master had defended her against his own cook. She blew out the candle. For the first time in her life, Clara Halloway slept without weeping. The next morning, chaos. That was the only word for the kitchen of the Red Rock Ranch at 5 a.m. Clara had woken before dawn, dressed in her plainest gray wool dress, and found her way downstairs. She found Martha struggling with a wood-burning stove that was smoking more than burning, while 12 hungry ranch hands sat at a long trestle table, banging their tin cups and shouting for coffee. The noise was deafening. The smell of burnt bacon hung in the air. "Where's the grub, Martha? I'm starving," yelled a young cowboy with a shock of red hair. "Hold your horses, Grady," Martha yelled back, coughing in the smoke. "The damper is stuck again." Clara stood in the doorway, observing. In Boston, she had been invisible. Here, in the chaos, she saw a system that was broken. She saw the problem immediately. She walked into the kitchen, ignoring the sudden silence of the men as they noticed the strange woman with the marked face. She went straight to the stove. "Excuse me," Clara said softly. Martha turned, flushed and angry. "Get out of the way, girl." Clara didn't move. She grabbed a heavy iron poker, reached into the flue, and unlatched the blockage with a sharp clank. The smoke instantly sucked up the chimney, and the fire roared to life. She then moved the skillet of bacon to a cooler part of the stovetop to stop the burning. She turned to the men. They were staring at her, some with curiosity, some with open revulsion as they saw her scar. "Coffee will be ready in 5 minutes," she announced, her voice trembling slightly but carrying across the room. "If you want it sooner, you can chew the beans." A silence hung in the air. Then, the red-headed cowboy, Grady, let out a bark of laughter. "She told you. Boys. Chew the beans." The tension broke. The men laughed. Clara turned back to the stove, her hands shaking, but she began to crack eggs with a speed and precision that made Martha stare. By the time Elias walked into the kitchen 10 minutes later, the men were eating quietly. The coffee was hot, and the kitchen was smoke-free. Elias stopped in the doorway. He looked at the men, then at Clara, who was scrubbing a pot with a ferocity that suggested the pot had personally offended her. He walked over to the coffee pot, poured himself a cup, and took a sip. He paused. It was actually good. Not the sludge Martha usually made. "Who made this?" he asked the room. "The new girl," Grady said with his mouth full. "She fixed the stove too, but she don't talk much." Elias looked at Clara. She kept her head down, the left side of her face turned away from him. "Miss Halloway," Elias said. She froze. "Yes, sir? When you're done here, come to the study. It's time to see if you can handle the real mess." The study 3 days later. The study was a testament to Elias Sterling's mind. Brilliant, but cluttered. Stacks of paper towered on the desk. Maps were pinned haphazardly to the walls, and books on animal husbandry lay open on every surface. Clara had spent 3 days in this room, waging war against the chaos. She had organized the receipts by date, categorized the expenses, and balanced the checking logs. She worked with a frantic energy, terrified that if she stopped, Elias would realize he didn't need her and send her away. Elias was rarely inside. He was out on the range from dawn until dusk, dealing with the spring calving, but in the evenings, he would sit in the leather armchair by the fire, cleaning his rifle or mending tack, watching her work. They rarely spoke. It was a companionable silence, though Clara remained on edge. She felt his eyes on her often. Whenever she caught him looking, he would look away, his expression grim. On the 4th afternoon, Clara found the discrepancy. She was cross-referencing the feed bills from the local supplier, a man named Garrett Thorne Cousin, to the rival rancher Jedediah Holt, against the inventory logs. She frowned, running her finger down the column of numbers. She checked the math again. Then a third time. She stood up, her heart racing. She grabbed the heavy ledger and walked out of the house, heading toward the main corral where she could see Elias breaking a new colt. The wind was whipping dust across the yard. Clara held her skirts with one hand and the book with the other. Elias was in the round pen, holding a rope attached to a wild-eyed sorrel Mustang. He was calm, his movements fluid. The horse bucked and kicked, but Elias held firm, murmuring low words that the wind carried away. Clara climbed onto the fence rail. "Mr. Sterling." Elias didn't look away from the horse. "Not now, Clara. It's important," she yelled, the wind snatching her voice. He managed to tie the horse off and walked over to the fence, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked annoyed. "I told you. I'm busy." "What is it? Did Martha burn the house down?" "Someone is stealing from you," Clara blurted out. Elias went still. He took off his hat, slapping the dust from it against his leg. His eyes turned cold, the wolf's eyes. "What did you say?" Clara opened the ledger, balancing it on the fence rail. "Look. Here. Every month for the past 2 years, you have paid for 500 sacks of grain from the Thorne Supply Co. But the inventory logs from the barn signed by your foreman, Amos show only 300 sacks delivered. Elias leaned in, his shoulder brushing hers. She smelled the leather and sweat again. He traced the numbers with a dirty finger. That's 200 sacks a month missing, he muttered. That's thousands of dollars. Yes, Clara said. And look at the signatures on the invoices. They are countersigned by G.H. Elias's jaw tightened. Grady Hayes. The red-headed boy? Clara asked, shocked. The one who jokes in the kitchen? He handles the supply runs, Elias said, his voice dangerously quiet. I trusted him. His father worked for mine. Elias turned, looking toward the bunkhouse. Stay here. No, Clara said, surprising herself. I found it. I want to see it finished. Elias looked at her. For a moment, she thought he would order her back to the house. Instead, he gave a curt nod. Walk behind me, and if I tell you to run, you run. The confrontation. They found Grady in the tack room, playing cards with two other hands. When Elias darkened the doorway, the laughter died instantly. Boss? Grady said, a smile faltering on his face. You look like you chewed on a cactus. Elias threw the ledger onto the card table, scattering the coins and cards. Explain the grain, Grady. Grady looked at the book, then at Clara standing behind Elias. His face paled, then flushed red. He stood up, knocking his chair back. I don't know what you're talking about, Grady sneered. You're gonna listen to her? The scarred witch? She probably can't even read right. Clara flinched, stepping back. Elias moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, he had Grady pinned against the wall, his forearm pressed against the boy's throat. Careful, Elias growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the room. Insult Miss Halloway again, and I'll cut your tongue out before I fire you. The other two hands stood up, hands hovering near their belts. Stay out of it, Elias barked at them, never taking his eyes off Grady. He's been skimming grain and selling it back to the Thorns, stealing from me, stealing from you boys' bonuses. The other hands looked at Grady, their expressions shifting from defense to anger. In the West, stealing a man's horse or his money was the lowest sin. It was just a little on the side, Elias. Grady choked out. Jedediah Holt said he'd pay double. You have so much, you didn't even notice. I didn't notice, Elias said, pulling back and letting Grady slump to the floor. But she did. Elias pointed to the door. Pack your roll. You have 10 minutes to get off my land. If I see you after sunset, I'll shoot you for trespassing. Grady scrambled up, shooting a look of pure venom at Clara. You'll regret this, freak. Holt don't like snoops. He ran out. The room was silent. Elias adjusted his cuffs, his breathing heavy. He turned to the other two hands. Get back to work. He walked over to Clara, picking up the ledger. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the second time since the train station, he was right about one thing. Clara whispered, looking at the floor. I am a freak. Elias reached out, placing a finger under her chin and forcing her to look up. His touch was electric. He was a thief and a liar, Elias said firmly. And you just saved this ranch from bleeding dry. He stepped closer, towering over her. In Boston, they might care about pretty faces, Clara. Out here, we care about who watches your back. Today, you watched mine. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the duster coat. Thank you, Elias, she said, using his first name for the first time. Don't thank me yet, he said, his eyes darkening as he looked out the window toward the distant hills where the Holt ranch lay. Grady is going to run straight to Jedediah Holt, and Holt has been looking for a reason to start a war with me for 10 years. He handed her the ledger. Go back to the house, Clara. Lock the doors. The storm isn't over. It's just beginning. As Clara walked back to the main house, clutching the book to her chest, she realized something. She wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. She was a target, and for the first time in her life, she had something and someone worth fighting for. Red Rock Ranch, 2 days later. The atmosphere at Red Rock had shifted from chaotic to besieged. Since Grady's expulsion, a heavy silence hung over the valley, broken only by the wind whistling through the canyons and the nervous whinnies of the horses. Every ranch hand walked with a hand near their holster. The cattle were restless, as if the land itself knew violence was coming. Elias Sterling had transformed. If he was a recluse before, he was now a warden. He doubled the guard rotations, checked the perimeter fences himself at odd hours, and moved with a restless, prowling energy that made the floorboards of the main house groan in protest. Clara, however, found a strange peace in the tension. For the first time in her life, she had a defined purpose that wasn't just staying out of sight. "You're holding it wrong," Elias's voice cut through the crisp morning air. They were behind the main barn, facing a line of empty tin cans set up on a fence post. Clara held a heavy Colt Navy revolver in both hands, the weight of it dragging her arms down. She flinched as Elias stepped up behind her. "I have never held a gun before, Mr. Sterling," she said, trying to steady the barrel. "Elias," he corrected, his chest brushing against her back as he reached around to adjust her grip. "If we're going to be shot at together, you might as well use my Christian name." Clara's breath hitched. He was close. Too close. She could feel the heat radiating from him through her thin cotton dress. His large, rough hands covered hers, guiding her fingers into the proper position. He didn't pull away immediately. "Relax your shoulders," he murmured near her ear. "The gun is a tool, Clara. Like your ledger pen. It only does what you tell it to." "My pen doesn't kill people," she whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "It killed Grady's career," Elias noted dryly. "Now, aim for the middle can. Squeeze. Don't pull." Clara took a deep breath, narrowed her eyes, and squeezed. The gun roared, kicking back violently. Dust exploded 3 feet to the left of the can. "Better than I expected," Elias said, stepping back and crossing his arms. "You didn't drop it." Clara rubbed her wrist, looking at him. "Do you really think Holt will attack? Over a few sacks of grain?" Elias's expression darkened. He looked toward the jagged ridge of the mountains. "It's not about the grain, Clara. It never was. Jedediah Holt believes this valley belongs to him. My father bought this land legally 30 years ago, right out from under Holt's nose. Holt has been waiting for me to fail, to die, or to sell ever since. Grady was just his way of bleeding me slow. Now that we've stopped the bleeding, he'll try to cut the throat." He looked back at her, his steel-gray eyes softening imperceptibly. "That's why I'm moving you." Clara stiffened. "Moving me? Sending me back?" "No," Elias said sharply. "Into the main house. The guest room is too exposed. The windows face the canyon. I'm moving you to the room opposite mine. It has reinforced shutters. I can take care of myself," Clara insisted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I know you can," Elias said, walking toward her. He took the gun from her hand, his fingers lingering on her wrist. "But I won't have you hurt because of my war. You came here as a joke, Clara. But you are not a joke to me. You are necessary." The word hung in the air between them, heavier than the gun, sharper than the wind. Necessary. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in off the Rockies, shaking the ranch house to its foundations. Clara lay in her new room, listening to the rain lash against the roof. Sleep was impossible. Every crack of thunder sounded like a gunshot. She finally rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and crept into the hallway. A light flickered from the study downstairs. She found Elias sitting in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in one hand, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He had discarded his shirt, and for the first time, Clara saw the map of violence written on his skin. A jagged white scar ran from his shoulder across his chest. Another marred his ribs. He looked up as she entered, not making a move to cover himself. "Can't sleep?" "The thunder," she said softly, her eyes tracing the scars before she caught herself and looked away, blushing. "I didn't mean to stare." Elias let out a low, humorless laugh. "Stare all you want, Clara. We're a matched set, aren't we?" the scarred beast and the marked girl. Clara walked further into the room, emboldened by the shadows. How did you get them? The one on the shoulder was a Sioux arrow. 10 years ago, he said, taking a sip of whiskey. The ribs were a steer that didn't want to be branded. The rest. Just life in the territory. He gestured to the chair opposite him. Sit. Clara sat, pulling her shawl tighter. My sisters. They used to tell people I was cursed. That the mark on my face was the devil's thumbprint. Elias looked at her, his gaze intense. Your sisters are fools. In the wild, a mark means you survived something. It means you're tough. He leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Tell me, Clara, why did you stay? That first day at the station, you could have cried. You could have begged me for a ticket, but you got in the wagon. Clara looked into the fire. Because in Boston, I was invisible. I was a ghost in my own house. I thought even being a servant in hell would be better than being a ghost in heaven. She looked up at him. And because you didn't look away. Everyone looks away. Elias, you didn't. Elias set the glass down. He stood up and walked over to her chair. He dropped to one knee, a posture of submission from a man who bowed to no one. He reached out, his rough hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb tracing the port wine stain. Clara stopped breathing. I don't look away, Elias whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Because I like what I see. The air in the room grew thin. The distance between them vanished. Elias leaned in, his intent clear. Clara's eyes fluttered shut, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Bang! The front door burst open, slamming against the wall. Elias was on his feet in a microsecond, his revolver drawn from the holster on the table before Clara even opened her eyes. Martha stood in the doorway, dripping wet, her face pale as milk. Mr. Sterling, she gasped. The water tower. They've cut the lines. Elias cursed, the tender moment shattered instantly. He grabbed his shirt, pulling it on as he strode toward the door. The wolf was back. Stay inside, Clara, he ordered, not looking back. Bolt the door. He disappeared into the storm, leaving Clara alone in the study, her cheek still burning from his touch. The siege of Red Rock 3 days later. The cutting of the water lines was only the beginning. It was a psychological tactic. Holt was testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. For 3 days, the ranch operated on a razor's edge. The hands slept in shifts. Elias barely slept at all. Clara had taken over the logistics of the siege. She rationed the remaining water, organized the food supplies, and kept the men fed and calm. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was the quartermaster. Even the gruffest hands had stopped staring at her scar and started looking for her nod of approval. But the real blow came on a Tuesday, under the blinding glare of the noon sun. A rider approached the gate, not Holt, but a courier. He delivered a thick envelope addressed to Elias Sterling. Elias opened it on the porch, Clara standing silently by his side. As he read, his face drained of color. He handed the paper to Clara. It was a legal injunction, a summons to court in Laramie. He's challenging the deed, Elias said, his voice hollow. He claims the original survey was flawed. He claims Red Rock sits on government land that he has just purchased the grazing rights to. Clara scanned the document, her accountant's brain latching onto the details. This is a forgery. Look at the date on the survey citation. 1,854. But the territory wasn't resurveyed until 1860. The judge in Laramie is Holt's brother-in-law, Elias spat. It doesn't matter if it's a forgery. If I don't appear in court in 2 days to contest it, I forfeit the land by default. But if I leave the ranch to go to Laramie, then Holt attacks while you're gone. Clara finished. It was a trap. A perfect, legal trap. I have to go, Elias said, pacing the porch. I have no choice. If I lose the deed, the law comes down on his side. He can bring the U.S. Marshals to evict us. You can't go alone, Clara said. He'll have men waiting on the road. I'll take the boys, Elias said. I'll leave 3 men here to guard the house. I'll take the rest to Laramie. We ride hard. We make the court date. And we ride back." He turned to her, gripping her shoulders. "You have to stay here, Clara. It's safer. Lock the house. Don't open it for anyone but me." "I can come with you," she argued. "I know the numbers. I can prove the forgery." "No," Elias roared, the fear evident in his eyes. "The road is an ambush, waiting to happen. I can fight my way through, but not if I'm worrying about you. Promise me you'll stay." Clara looked at him, seeing the desperation. He was terrified of losing her. "I promise," she lied. The night of fire. Elias rode out an hour later with 10 men, a cloud of dust marking their departure. The ranch fell into an eerie silence. Clara didn't stay in the house. The moment the dust settled, she went to the study. She pulled every map, every deed, every scrap of paper related to the ranch's history. She spread them out on the floor. "If Holt wants the land this bad," she muttered to herself, "it's not just about grazing. There's something else." She worked for hours, her eyes straining in the lamplight. She cross-referenced the topographical maps with the geological surveys her father had taught her to read during his brief mining venture investments. Then she saw it. A small notation on an old survey from 1850, a survey Holt likely thought destroyed. Vein 4, gold traces. It ran right under the creek bed, right under the water source Holt had cut. "He doesn't want the cows," Clara whispered, realization chilling her blood. "He wants a gold mine." Suddenly, the dogs began to bark. Not the warning bark, but the pained yelp of an animal being struck. Clara blew out the lamp. She moved to the window. Shadows were moving across the yard, not from the road, but from the creek bed. They had bypassed the main gate. Elias had taken the men to Laramie. The trap wasn't the court date. The trap was getting Elias away from the ranch so they could burn it down and claim the ashes. Clara grabbed the Colt Navy from the desk drawer. She checked the cylinder. 5 shots. She ran to the kitchen, where Martha was hiding under the table. "Stay here," Clara whispered. "Bar the door." "Where are you going?" Martha cried. "To the barn," Clara said. "If they burn the barn, the wind will carry the fire to the house. I have to stop them." Clara slipped out the back door, merging with the shadows. The air smelled of kerosene. She saw 3 men near the stables. One of them was holding a torch. Even in the darkness, she recognized the slouch, the red hair. "Grady, light it up," Grady whispered to the others. "Holt said no witnesses. Burn the animals, burn the house, make it look like an accident." Clara's fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. This was her home. Elias was her well, he was hers. She stepped out from behind the water trough, raising the heavy pistol with 2 hands. "Drop the torch, Grady." Grady spun around, squinting into the dark. When he saw Clara, he laughed a cruel, jagged sound. Well, the ugly duckling. I thought you'd be hiding under the bed." "I said drop it," Clara said, her voice steady. She didn't stutter. "Or what?" Grady sneered, taking a step toward the dry hay of the barn wall. "You gonna shoot me, sweetheart? You don't have the guts." He lowered the torch toward the hay. Bang! Clara didn't aim for the man. She aimed for the torch. The bullet shattered the wooden handle, sending the burning rag spinning into the dirt. Grady yelled, clutching his hand, staring at her in shock. "You crazy witch!" The other 2 men drew their guns. Clara dove behind the water trough as bullets chipped the wood above her head. She was pinned down. She cocked the hammer again, her hands shaking now. 1 against 3. "Flank her," Grady screamed. "Get her!" Clara squeezed her eyes shut, praying for a miracle. And then, the night exploded. Thunder of hooves. Not 1 horse, but a dozen. Gunfire erupted from the ridge above the barn, a volley of shots that sent Grady's men diving for cover. Clara peeked over the trough. Riding down the hill, backlit by the moon like an avenging angel, was Elias. He hadn't gone to Laramie. He rode straight into the yard, reins in his teeth, firing a rifle with one hand and a pistol with the other. The trap had been a double bluff. Elias knew Holt would strike the moment he left. He had ridden out, circled back through the canyons, and waited. "Get them!" Elias roared to his men. The yard turned into a chaotic swirl of dust and gunpowder. Elias's men, seasoned hands, made short work of Holt's hired guns. Most threw down their weapons and surrendered immediately, but Grady didn't surrender. He saw Elias distracted, reloading his rifle. He saw his chance. He raised his pistol, aiming at Elias's back. "Elias!" Clara screamed. She didn't think. She broke cover, running across the open yard. She threw herself at Grady just as he pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. Clara felt a punch to her side, a hot, searing pain that took her breath away. She collided with Grady, driving the dagger she had hidden in her boot into his shoulder. He screamed and dropped the gun. Then Elias was there. He pistol-whipped Grady with a force that cracked bone, sending the foreman into the dust, unconscious. Elias dropped to his knees, catching Clara as she crumbled. "Clara!" His voice was a raw, terrified animal sound. She looked up at him. The world was going gray at the edges. She pressed her hand to her side. It came away wet and red. "I didn't let them burn it," she whispered. "I found the gold, Elias." "They want the gold." "Hush, hush," Elias said, ripping off his shirt to press it against her wound. His face, usually so stoic, was twisted in agony. Tears, actual tears, were cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. "Don't you talk. Don't you dare leave me. You hear me, Clara? That's an order. You came back," she smiled weakly. "I never left," he choked out. "I would never leave you." Clara's eyes drifted to the sky. The stars were so bright here, brighter than Boston. "It's not ugly," she murmured, her consciousness fading. "It's beautiful." Then, darkness took her. The longest night. The ride back to the main house was a blur of agony for Clara, but a living nightmare for Elias. He kicked the front door open with a violence that splintered the wood, carrying Clara's limp body into the study. "Martha, hot water and linens, now!" His voice was a raw, cracked scream. He laid her on the leather sofa, his hands that had branded cattle and strangled wolves, trembling as he pressed his shirt against the gunshot wound in her side. "Don't you die," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers, smearing dust and sweat onto her pale skin. "You stubborn woman, don't you dare die on me." For 3 days, the Wolf of Red Rock did not sleep. He washed the wound, stitched the jagged tear in her flesh, and held her hand through the delirium of fever. When she thrashed, mumbling about being ugly and hidden, Elias kissed her knuckles, whispering fiercely, "You are the light. You are the only light in this God-forsaken valley." The awakening. The fever broke on the 4th morning. Clara blinked open her eyes to see Elias asleep in the armchair, looking like a ruin of a man. When she stirred, he woke instantly. "You stayed," she whispered, her throat dry. "Where else would I go?" Elias choked out, pouring her water. "You took a bullet for me, Clara. It seemed logical." She smiled weakly. "I am just the bookkeeper. You are everything," he corrected, his voice rough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled geological survey Clara had hidden. "We found the papers. This proves the gold vein runs under the creek." Holt wasn't fighting for grass. He was fighting for a fortune. With this and Grady's confession, the federal marshals arrested Holt this morning. The war is over. Clara closed her eyes, a tear escaping. It's finally over. The proposal. 2 weeks later, Clara stood on the porch, her bags packed. She was healed enough to travel, and she had decided to leave before Elias could politely dismiss her. He had his ranch and his gold. He didn't need a scarred spinster anymore. Going somewhere? Elias stood at the bottom of the steps, his face darkening as he saw the valise. "My work is done," Clara stammered, avoiding his gaze. "You can hire a proper wife now, someone who can host dinners, someone without this." She touched her scar. Elias laughed, a dark, incredulous sound. He stormed up the steps, invading her space. "A proper wife? You think I want a porcelain doll? I sent for a housekeeper because I thought I was too broken for a woman to love. Then you showed up. He took her hand, placing it over his heart. You walked into my darkness, and you didn't light a candle. You became the fire. I don't want a pretty wife, Clara. I want the woman who fixed my stove. I want the woman who saved my life. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside sat a raw, uncut sapphire ring. Marry me, Clara. Not as a joke, not as a housekeeper, but as the mistress of Red Rock. Clara looked at the ring, then at the man who saw a queen where the world saw a monster. Tears spilled over her lashes. Yes, she whispered. I will ride the storm with you. Red Rock Ranch. June 1877. To Miss Lydia and Miss Annabel Halloway, you sent me here as a cruel prank, hoping to break the ugly daughter by mailing her to a monster. I am writing to thank you. You were right. Elias Sterling is a beast, but I was not a lamb. I was a wolf waiting for her pack. We struck gold last month. The monster and I are now the wealthiest landowners in the territory, but more importantly, we are happy in a way you will never understand. Enclosed is a draft for $50. Use it to buy a conscience. Do not write again. Sincerely, Mrs. Clara Sterling. Clara sealed the letter and handed it to the post rider. She turned back to the porch where Elias was rocking their newborn daughter, who bore a small birthmark on her shoulder. The scar on Clara's face didn't ache anymore. It was just a line on a map, showing the road she had traveled to find her way home. And that is the story of Clara Halloway. It began as a cruel joke by a family who thought beauty was the only currency that mattered. They tried to dispose of the ugly daughter like an unwanted parcel, but they forgot that in the Wild West, the land doesn't care about your face, it cares about your grit. Clara didn't just survive, she thrived. She found the one place where her scars were a badge of honor and a man who worshipped the strength she forged in the fire. It's a reminder that sometimes the things the world calls ugly are just strengths waiting to be discovered. If this story of justice and romance satisfied your soul, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. What was your favorite moment? Was it when Clara stood up to the foreman, or that final letter to her wicked sisters? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about underdogs finding their power, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening.